Welcome to Alaska Weather. I'm meteorologist Eric Holloway, February 18th, 2020. We have a couple options to help you further research the forecast that you see here tonight. It's through a 1-800 number, which will allow you to go through a menu system and dial in your forecast for your area of concern. And we also allow you to go online through weather.gov/Alaska. And if you replace Alaska with Fairbanks, Anchorage, or Juneau, that'll help you to further refine your search. Lastly, we also provide you with an email at that address there at the bottom of the screen to contact us with any questions you may have. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us. Looking at the hazardous weather for the watch warning and advisory map, you can see that we have winter storm advisories out for the northwest coast through Wednesday afternoon for snow and blowing snow across that area. If we move down through this coastal area of the St. Lawrence Island, Bering Strait coast, and Chukchi Sea coast, we have near whiteout conditions there with 50-mile-an-hour winds picking up and throwing the snow around through Wednesday afternoon, making travel very difficult out that way. But also, we have winter storm warnings from the lower Yukon Valley up through the middle Yukon and up through the Noatak and Kobuk valleys of the headwaters there. We have up to 8 inches out for that area for blowing and drifting snow through Wednesday morning. Also, lesser amounts can be expected through much of the coast of the Norton Sound and through the YK Delta. Lastly, through much of south central and even portions of the northeast panhandle, we have winter storm warning out for the Matsu Valley, and underneath that little dot there in Anchorage, we have for the Anchorage Bowl that winter storm warning, and that is for until Wednesday morning for heavy snow in the area. Again, we had a pretty good windstorm here in Anchorage Bowl overnight, and then turned to snow early this morning, and we had about 6 to 8 inches here at the office. And that forecast was for 6 to 12. And then for the Matsu Valley, we had portions of that area up to 15 inches expected. If we look at that northeast portion of the panhandle there, they were expecting 6 to 8 inches there, making travel very difficult through the passes, White and Choku Pass. But otherwise, pretty active morning this morning here at the office. And what this kind of looks like on satellite, you can see low pressure system in this area, and with the stationary, we analyzed the stationary front carrying up through portions of the Brooks Range, a cold front coming down into the northern Bering Sea. Otherwise, there was another low here with a weak warm front kind of swinging through eastward through the northern Gulf, but otherwise another cold front through the rest of the Gulf of Alaska. And lastly, there was a next low showing up there in the Aleutians, but we'll set this again in motion. You can see all the cloud cover and snow showers in south central this morning, and pretty white clouds up through the Yukon Territory there, and snow showers across much of the interior region down through portions of the Yukon, middle and lower Yukon. And finally out there, snow showers through portions of Alaska Peninsula and Aleutians. What does this look like on the surface map? There's the couple lows I was talking about, 985 and 983 low. Otherwise, scattered snow showers across much of the stationary boundary and up through the North Slope. And mixed precipitation rain showers even through the northeast Gulf Coast, down through the Panhandle, and there was snow showers there reported in portions of the Alaska Peninsula. Lastly, 979 millibar low showing up there with a warm front approaching central and western Aleutians. For tonight's weather, we're going to be looking at, again, these weakening systems here across the Seward Peninsula, 988 millibar low now and a 984 there, with the trough now spread out through the Panhandle. Precipitation continues there. We analyzed some possibility of heavy rain there in the northeast Gulf Coast, but otherwise Scattered snow showers across portions of Canada and up through south central and in through portions of the interior. And again, with that next system climbing up the chain, included front there with snow showers and mixed precipitation. For Wednesday's weather, again, lingering snow showers across south central and into the Copper River Basin, otherwise mixed precipitation across much of Panhandle, even snow showers with a trough across the Arctic coast, and then snow showers across the Seward Peninsula and northeast or northwest part of the mainland. Otherwise, included front, again, that low pressure system is going to be climbing the chain and into the Alaska Peninsula here over the next couple of days, but otherwise mixed precipitation, snow showers through Bristol Bay, rain showers through much of the Gulf, and possibly showing up there in the Panhandle by Wednesday afternoon. For Thursday's weather, again, finally that low makes it into the Cook Inlet region with the 976 millibar low there, and warm front showing up for the Panhandle with mixed precipitation, rain showers, and even snow showers further inland. Otherwise, scattered snow showers through south central down through Bristol Bay and even through the YK Delta, Seward Peninsula, and then lingering snow showers through much of the Bering Sea, Alaska Peninsula, and Aleutians. For the low temperatures on Wednesday morning, we're going to be looking at single digits and teens across much of the North Slope. Otherwise, Anaktuvuk Pass is -6, Arctic Village is -7. Fort Yukon looks like to be possibly the lowest reading there. Between them and Bettles, 0 and 1. And Nome 4 and Kotzebue 6. Otherwise, down through the YK Delta, single digits, Bethel 5. And in 30s and even 20s through South Central, and Kodiak coming in at 28, but King Salmon 19, 20s through Alaska Peninsula and down through the chain. And taking a peek at southeast, looking at 30s there for Wednesday morning with 34 in Skagway, 36 in Ketchikan. For Wednesday afternoon, looks like we might be warming up a little bit there on the North Slope with single digits and even just below zero values across the rest of the North Slope. Kotzebue warms up to 11, 9 at Nome, and warming up to 15 there in Fort Yukon. Must be a nice change since all the cold temperatures over the last couple weeks. But 20s in Fairbanks and Delta 23, and Eagle 26, and down through the YK Delta, looks like we're going to be looking at teens and maybe even a single reading there near the lower Yukon, but otherwise 30s through South Central and Southwest, 20s and 30s, and maybe even a 40 there in the western or eastern Aleutians. And again, southeast looks like to be in the 30s and maybe even a 40 there in Ketchikan. But Thursday morning, again, we're down in the minus teens across much of the North Slope, even minus 20s. Northwest portion of the Arctic coast, otherwise -6 there in Kotzebue, -7 in Nome, -5 there in Fort Yukon, -5 there in Bettles as well, and 20s across South Central and the YK Delta and Kuskokwim. Looks like single digits down that way. And for Thursday afternoon, looks like we're going to be getting into the 30s across South Central, minus teens along the North Slope, and 30s across Southwest and down through the chain. Otherwise, the Panhandle is going to be in the 30s.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
Moving on to flying weather for Wednesday morning, with a couple low pressure system with the frontal bands associated with a couple lows there near Seward Peninsula and down across the North Gulf Coast. IFR conditions spread out across the Panhandle into South Central and then over through the northwest coast and portions of the Brooks Range. And then the next low pressure system in the Aleutians brings IFR and marginal conditions across much of the Alaska Peninsula and across the Aleutians for Wednesday afternoon. Dissipating system along the North Gulf brings scattered IFR conditions across that region and into portions of the Alaska Range. Otherwise, stationary front brings IFR conditions across much of the North Slope and Seward Peninsula. And again, that low pressure system climbing the chain brings IFR conditions across that area. For Thursday morning, dissipating low and frontal system brings IFR conditions across much of the North Gulf, South Central, Kodiak Island, Bristol Bay region, and down through the Alaska Peninsula. Otherwise, marginal conditions through the rest of the Aleutians and even marginal conditions across much of the North Slope and portions of the Brooks Range, even IFR conditions there on the Arctic coast. For Thursday afternoon, again, the system stays with us through Thursday afternoon. Again, IFR conditions across portions of much of the Panhandle, North Gulf, Prince William Sound, and then through Bristol Bay southwest with IFR conditions, otherwise marginal across much of the southwest and south central. For past conditions on Wednesday, Anaktuvik IFR, Adigan IFR, and then Lake Clark and Merrill, we went IFR early and then switching to marginal conditions during the afternoon. And then Wednesday for rainy IFR early, turning to marginal by the end of the day. Windy IFR, Isabel IFR, Mantasta marginal early, switching to VFR conditions there. And Tanita IFR to marginal conditions there. Portage IFR through much of the day. Chilkoot and White, we stuck with IFR conditions throughout the day. For the freezing level, I'll switch over here. You can see that we have elevated freezing levels there near the southern end of the Panhandle. Otherwise, surface freezing level crosses the Alaska, the Seward Peninsula, across the Panhandle and into the North Gulf, down through Kodiak Island, Alaska Peninsula, and into the Bering. Otherwise, with that next system, bringing elevated freezing levels down that way. For icing on Wednesday, rather complicated map with this series of low pressure systems. Otherwise, we're going to be above 4,000 feet with considerable moderate in portions of the northern Panhandle and across the North Gulf Coast there. I also did analyze some considerable moderate there in the Bristol Bay region with significant moisture associated with that system. Otherwise, between 3,000 and 6,000 feet across much of the southwest, Alaska Peninsula and Aleutians, and across Kodiak Island, even across the eastern interior and down through the Seward Peninsula between 2,000 and 6,000 feet up that way. Even significant moisture along the North Slope, I put above 1,000 feet up that way. For the jet stream, looking at 155 knots coming out of Japan, and as you get into the North Gulf, 130 knots there, around that low pressure, 95 knots as you get into the North Gulf. Otherwise, around that high, 90 to 100 knots down the front side of that ridge. Otherwise, 25 knots across the northwest coast, and 20 knots, much weaker conditions out there with that other low near Russia. For the 9,000 foot winds, looking at again, southerly winds dominate with 15 to even 30 knots across much of the mainland. Otherwise, the Panhandle, 20 to 30 knots there. And again, 10 to 20 knots down and around that low there. Otherwise, the strongest winds were down just south of the eastern Aleutians with 90 to 70 knots there, even a 50 knot in the portions of the Alaska Peninsula. 3,000 foot winds, again, southerly winds, 10 to 15 knots across the mainland. Otherwise, 40 to 20 knots across the Bering Sea. And turbulence, we're going to be looking at below 4,000 feet across the Panhandle, below 6,000 feet as you move into the Alaska Range and Copper River Basin. I did analyze isolated severe there in portions of the Alaska Peninsula up below 4,000 feet in there, otherwise below 2,000 feet across the Aleutians.
Welcome back to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and joining me once again is Eric Stevens from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska, based up at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Eric, welcome back to the program.
Hey, I'm glad to be here.
And once again, you brought some wonderful satellite pictures to show us and do a little show and tell about. It's just amazing. I can get lost in satellite pictures all day. What did you bring today?
Right. Well, weather satellites, what are they good for? Yeah. Of course, there's the pretty pictures that they bring us. You know, we've got a picture here from April of 2012. Okay. The Sumi NPP satellite, it's what they call a polar orbiter, which means it covers Alaska because we're near the pole. Beautiful image. You can see a storm off of southeast Alaska, the sea ice along the Bering Sea up into the Arctic. A really nice picture, and this is important because it allows a forecaster to see where the storms are, where the ice is, where the clear areas are. You need to know where the weather is now if you're going to forecast it into the future. Exactly. So satellites give us these good pictures. This is called surveillance of the weather. And you know, that same satellite also has another picture from a little more recently, August of 2014, Tropical Storm Iselle bearing down on the Hawaiian Islands. Hawaii doesn't get hit by a whole lot of tropical storms or hurricanes. Sometimes it does. And here's a picture from the same satellite, the Sumi NPP Polar Orbiter. It shows Tropical Storm Iselle approaching the Hawaiian Islands from the southeast. You can see the storm swirling away there, and then there's the Hawaiian Islands. This is a tropical storm, not quite as strong as a hurricane because we don't see the eye wall in there. This is still a serious weather system. And all of this information comes just from that satellite picture. It's so much information, and it's wonderful to look at. You see the beauty and the awe of nature right there depicted in that weather satellite. We call it a polar orbiter because the satellite flies high over the globe. Maybe we could look here at we happen to bring the planet Earth with us. This is our satellite. A polar orbit flies really close to the Earth, maybe 800 kilometers over the Earth, and goes up over the pole and then back down, and then the Earth spins under the satellite as it goes by. That's in contrast to the geostationary birds, which are much further out. And they don't view Alaska quite as well. So we love those polar orbiter satellites here in Alaska.
So when we're a lot closer, we get much better details and imagery and an idea of a better maybe position of what's going on when it's passing right over Alaska or right over Hawaii.
Yes, exactly right. The polar orbiter gives such a good view of places like Alaska. And because it's close to the planet, there's another aspect of satellites in the polar orbit that is helpful for weather forecasting. It's an aspect that's maybe not as immediately obvious as the pretty pictures that we see. And that is the capacity for the satellite to produce what's called a sounding. That is finding the vertical profile of temperature and moisture in the atmosphere. We've all heard of weather balloons. Weather balloons are launched here in Alaska twice a day at a number of airports, everywhere from Barrow to St. Paul Island to Kodiak, Anchorage and Fairbanks, Yakutat, a number of places. Launch these balloons, and we've got a picture of a balloon being launched at an airport, and the balloon goes up. It's pulling a little package, an instrument package with it that reports temperature, pressure, humidity data back, and we use that information to help feed what are called numerical weather prediction models.
The models.
The models, right. It's a mouthful, so we just call it the models. And these computer simulations, these models are computer programs that simulate the motion of the atmosphere. Well, how does a model know what the future will be like? You have to tell the model what things are like now. And you give it all kinds of information, including information from these satellite sounders. Very important. Just how important are they? We have a recent, comparatively recent study that really brings home, and this is Superstorm Sandy. We have a track image here of the track of Hurricane Sandy. Was down in the Caribbean around Cuba, and then it moved north over the ocean, offshore of the eastern seaboard, and then at the last minute, Sandy made what's called the left hook. It turned hard to the left and slammed into New Jersey. Was a major problem for the mid-Atlantic states, a calamity. It fused with another weather system and became known, this is not an official title, but Superstorm Sandy. It was quite the weather event. Well, the modelers, after the event, there's a group of modelers in Europe. They have a very good model, a frustratingly good model if you're the Americans trying to pursue their excellence. They reran their model afterwards in what's called a data denial study, where they kept everything the same. So this is 6 months after Sandy, but they went back, they reran the same model, they fed the model the same initial conditions, that is telling the model, okay, here's where we think Sandy is, down near Cuba in the Caribbean. Everything was the same as it was in the real forecast, except they didn't let the model know.
No satellite data.
No satellite data.
Okay.
So we're going to put that over here. No
Yeah.
satellite data for you. The resulting forecast 5 days out,
Yeah.
back when the real Sandy was happening and the model had the satellite data, the forecast was pretty good. We've got a graphic here on the left side. We show the forecast of where Sandy would be, and that's the red bullseye on the left. It's just south of where it actually wound up hitting. Not a bad forecast from this computer simulation, 120 hours out. On the right, you see the same model, but it didn't have the satellite data to help it understand things. And the storm is way offshore. It misses. The forecast is more accurate when the model has the satellite data. So that's the idea today we want to convey is weather satellites. They're important because they show us the pictures of where storms are. We see good examples of this. Yeah, the surveillance right now, it's great to look at those pictures. And in addition, behind the scenes, maybe not immediately obvious, but the models have to have that satellite data for them to be good forecasts. And then a meteorologist uses that information to help everyone with the forecast of where the storms will be in the future.
That is fascinating information that we can look at, see where things have been, because you can't know where you're going if you don't know where you've been. That's that old adage there. But seeing that satellites are actually helping us move forward in the weather information system is pretty amazing stuff.
You bet.
And if you want to check out Eric's satellite images that he's been talking about, whether that's something from today or last week or even much further back in Alaska history, you can easily do that yourself. Go to www.gina.alaska.edu and you can find those images there. Eric, thanks so much for joining us once again. And again, we will join you hopefully again soon for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts, where you'll tell us more really cool information about the satellites over our heads in Alaska. Thanks for joining us tonight, and we'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Let's take a look at the marine forecast, starting with the ice edge. We analyzed generally on the area around St. Matthew and west of St. Matthew. Ice edge actually moved quite a bit from the north, 25 nautical miles. Otherwise, some southerly winds from the south on the other side of St. Matthew Island, driving the ice slightly northward. We didn't get a good image in Cook Inlet, so pretty much the same there. Otherwise, generally an opening there in Bristol Bay region. For Wednesday's marine forecast for southeast, through much of the inside waters, small craft advisories will be out. Winds generally from the south, 25 to 30, seas as high as 11 feet there in Clarence Strait. Otherwise, outside waters, winds generally from the southwest, 15 to 20 knots there, even along the North Gulf. And for Thursday, inside waters, winds again from the south at 20 to 30 knots there. Small craft advisories across much of the central and southern part of the inside waters. Outside waters, winds generally from the south, just over gales out there, with winds from the south at 40, seas as high as 18 feet. Southern part of the outside waters there from the southwest at 30 knots. Otherwise, North Gulf from the southeast, gales there, 35 knots, seas as high as 18 feet. For south central, the Gulf region's going to be looking at winds generally from the southwest, 25 knots there, small crafts, seas as high as 14 feet. Prince William Sound from the south at 20. Cook Inlet, winds generally from the south, 20 knots there. On Thursday, outside waters in the Gulf, we're going to be looking at winds generally from the southwest at 20 to 25 knots. As you get into the North Gulf and Prince William Sound, winds generally from the south, just over gales there, with winds 45 knots, seas as high as 18 feet. Cook Inlet, winds generally from the south, from the north, 20 to 30 knots, seas as high as 6 feet there near the Kamishak Bay region. For Alaska Peninsula, Kodiak Island, around Kodiak Island, winds generally from the south at 20 to 35 knots, seas as high as 16 feet there just off the shore. South of Alaska Peninsula, winds from the southwest at 35 knots, seas as high as 14 feet. North side of the Alaska Peninsula and Bristol Bay, winds generally from the east at 30 knots, seas as high as 6 feet. And for Thursday, around Kodiak Island, winds generally from the west at 25 to 35 knots, seas as high as 23 feet. Otherwise, south side of the Alaska Peninsula, winds from the west at 35 knots, seas as high as 26 feet. And on the north side of the Alaska Peninsula, winds from the northeast at 39 30 knots, and winds generally from the northeast at 30 knots, seas as high as 10 feet. For the Aleutian chain, winds generally from the south across the central and eastern portions with 30 to 40 knots there, seas as high as 23 feet. Otherwise, the western side of the Aleutians, generally from the north, 30 to 40 knots. Near gales there with winds generally out of the north and seas high as 20 feet. For Thursday, winds generally from the northeast across the region with 15 to 30 knots, seas as high as 25 feet as you get over near Unalaska, just south of there. And for the west coast, winds generally from the north, 20 to 30 knots there. Pribs generally from the northeast at 35 knots, seas as high as 11 feet. And for Thursday, again, still northerly, 30 knots across much of the region. Norton Sound, northerly at 25 knots. Otherwise, Pribs, northwesterly at 30, seas as high as 11 feet. For the Arctic coast, looking at generally northerly winds up to 20 knots there. And likewise down the northwest coast and through the Bering Strait, 20 to 30 knots there out of the north. And slightly decreasing winds across the Arctic, just off the Arctic coast. Winds generally from the north, 10 to 15 knots. Otherwise, down through the northwest and Bering Strait, 15 to 30 knots out of the north. And near gales there, just off the Seward Peninsula. For tonight's weather, we're going to be looking at complex low-pressure systems. One just out near the Seward Peninsula, other one here in south central with snow across south central, even heavy rain down through the North Gulf Coast, rain through much of the rest of the peninsula, and another low near the Aleutians.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.